Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I will be ranking all of the short stories that are included in the collection Skeleton Crew, of course, by Stephen King. For those of you who don't know, I'm actually running a Stephen King short story book club on my Discord server, where we basically read 1 to 2 short stories a week. And we started out with Night Shift, and that went very well. And I've already ranked all of the stories in Night Shift, and we just wrapped up Skeleton Crew, so I figured I might as well go ahead and rank all of them. I also just wanted to quickly mention that since we're done with Skeleton Crew, we just wrapped it up, starting July 4th, we will be starting Nightmares and Dreamscapes, which is his third short story collection. It's not one of my favorites, but I think the problem was when I originally read it, I kind of binged all of them, and these short stories are quite lengthy. This is about a 700-page book, so I think I will enjoy it more reading it slowly, and I feel like a lot of people are enjoying it, like reading it just one story a week. They don't get bombarded with King. So I think I will enjoy it more the second time around, reading it at a much slower pace. We're probably not going to finish this until like December because it's a bit chunky. But like I said, we're going to go ahead and start this on July 4th, reading about 1, sometimes 2 short stories a week. And I'll, of course, leave a link down below for my Discord server. So if you want to come join the Stephen King Short Story Book Club, you can do so there. Back to the video. Like I said, we just finished Skeleton Crew, and I believe there are 22 short stories here. Some of them are novella length, but you know it's easier just to say short stories. But essentially what I'm going to do is rank them from my least favorite all the way up to my favorites. And looking at a lot of people's lists, it's very interesting to see what people really loved in this collection and what people really didn't like. I agree with a lot of it, but then there's some that I know people are not going to agree with me. And of course, that's the whole fun of making ranking videos in the first place, is to get everybody's, honest reactions and honest rankings. So that's what I'm going to provide for y'all today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the ranking. All right, coming in as my least favorite in the collection, number 22 is For Owen, which essentially is just a 2-page poem, and literally like that's the second page of it. I really don't have that much to say about it. I don't really like Stephen King poetry, and there's 2 poems in here, and number 22 is For Owen. I know some people like it, but really I'm just not a huge fan of Stephen King poetry. So coming in at number 22, For Owen, I have really nothing to say about it. And coming in at number 21 on the list, we have the second poem in the collection, and that would be Paranoid, a Chant, which again is just another little poem. This one is a little higher just because, I don't know, I like it more. Like I said, I really don't have that much to say about these poems. Not a big Stephen King poetry fan. So yeah, those are the reasons why those 2 are at the very bottom of the list. And number 20 on the list, we have the second Milkman story, which is titled Big Wheels, A Tale of the Laundry Game. And like I said, this is Milkman number 2. Milkman number 1 will be slightly higher on the list. For this one, it was kind of forgettable. I think when I read it, I had a decent time with it. But then like after a week or 2, I was, coming up with my ranking, and I was just like, what even happened in that story? And then I, went back and reread a little bit of it, and I was like, oh yeah. So really, it didn't leave that much of a lasting impression on me. It's not that great, and it's not even as good as Milkman number 1. So for that reason, I put it at number 20 on the list. And for number 19 on the list, we have The Wedding Gig, which I definitely see a lot of people ranking this at the very bottom. And I can understand why. For me, I think King sometimes has a problem with his short stories of telling it from the wrong perspective. And I definitely agree with some of the people in the comments on my Discord. It should have been told from one person's perspective, but it wasn't. And it just didn't really feel right. I think the reason I ranked it a little higher than others is just because you're following a musician who's like in a band, and I can kind of relate to like the stuff that he has to do, like helping the drummer carry around the drum set, like when, like I got a chuckle out of that. But then the actual like story elements of this, because like they're basically playing in a band, like at a wedding gig for this mobster, and this mobster's sister who is described as being like morbidly obese, and it just goes into some weird directions. And honestly, the story should have been told from the woman's perspective, and it should have been her getting revenge on what happened. But instead we get it from this random musician at this wedding gig, and it should have been told from the woman's perspective. That would have been a much better story, in my opinion. But as it stands, I'm going to put the wedding gig at number 19. And for number 18 on my list, I'm going to have to go with Kane Rose Up, which is a very short story. It's only like 7 pages. It's one of King's earliest short stories. And essentially what you get is this kid, this guy in college, he's sitting in his dorm room, and his roommates, like they're just finishing up classes and finishing up final exams. And it's basically just them talking. And then he's, the guy's being very nonchalant. And then all of a sudden, something happens just out of nowhere. And I don't feel like King really fleshed it out very well. And it just didn't have a lot of meat on the bones for me. And for that reason, I'm going to have to go with that for number 18. And for number 17, this might be a bit controversial. I don't know. I know a lot of King fans love it. But I'm going to have to go with the very last story in the collection, which is The Reach. Now, I know for Stephen King himself, this is not only like one of his favorite short stories that he's ever written, it's just one of his favorite things that he's ever written, like novels, short stories, novellas. Like he cites this as like one of the things he wants to be remembered for. Whereas for me, it wasn't that great. Like it's good, but it's not great. And it's weird, like he chose this story, and if you go back from the Night Shift read along, he chose The Woman in the Room, which they kind of have a similar vibe. They're very weird stories to end collections on, and for me, it shouldn't have ended this way. It should have ended with a much better story. He's weird about like ending collections in a weird way. But yeah, for me, The Reach, I mean, it's fine, but it's nowhere near the top of my list, obviously. And so for The Reach, I'm going to have to go with number 17. And for number 16 on my list, we're going to have to go with Milkman number 1, aka Morning Deliveries. And this one I did like a little bit more than Milkman number 2. The problem is it's only 5 pages, yet again, extremely short, not enough meat on the bones. It had a really cool idea, basically about this sadistic, psychotic milkman who just like is delivering tainted milk to customers. Like he does weird stuff to it. Like that's the premise, which is pretty cool. But again, it's only 5 pages. I wish it would have been a bit more fleshed out. But it's still a really cool idea. And for that reason, I'm going to have to put it at number 16 on the list. And for number 15 on the list, I know a lot of King fans love it, but it's just not really my cup of tea, even though it's not terrible or anything. But I'll just go ahead and shut up and tell you what it is. It's The Monkey, which it's quite a long short story, and it deals with something that I don't think King does necessarily very well, and that's basically taking an inanimate object and turning it into like an evil thing that's alive. And basically with The Monkey, which is like on the cover of a lot of Skeleton Crew's covers, it's basically turning like one of those animatronic like monkey things that crashes the cymbals and turns it evil. And it's just not that scary. It's not that entertaining. Like it's a funny idea, but even the story itself goes on a bit too long at like 40 pages. It could have been a really cool, maybe like 10, 15 page story, but 40 pages, too long for such a silly, dumb idea. And for me, that's why it comes in at number 15. And for number 14 on the list, we have Uncle Otto's Truck, which again is King telling yet again another like evil car story where it's either getting possessed or it's doing something weird. He has a lot of like cars coming to life stories, and this is one of them, and it's fine, but the ending isn't very great. And out of all like the Stephen King car stories, it's not one of my favorites. So for me, it is kind of forgettable. It's kind of meh. Not great, but not terrible. Sort of in the middle, which makes sense for why it's in the middle of my ranking. So again, number 14 is Uncle Otto's Truck. And number 13 on the list, we have The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands. Now, admittedly, this is a pretty cool story, and I really like the connection that it makes to one of the novellas in different seasons. I really like that. I get a kick out of it. But for me, the problem with the story is the way that King decides to tell it. He essentially has this guy telling a story about a guy telling a story. It's one of those weird things. Instead of like just like having like a third person point of view, he has to have like someone tell the story of someone else, and it can be a bit confusing, and it's just it reads sometimes clunky because like he'll get interrupted, and then you're like, wait a minute, is this in the story or is this out of the story? So it could have been told in a more natural way, but the way it was told, it was just very clunky. But I do really like the idea of the story of the man who would not shake hands. So it is pretty good, but for me, it comes in at like the middle of the pack. So The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands, number 13 on the list. And for number 12 on the list, we have The Reaper's Image. Now, this is also one of the earlier King short stories that he got published in the 60s. I believe it was 1968 when he was either in college or fresh out of college. Either way, it's definitely on the shorter side, and it's definitely got more of that classic horror feel. Like, it's essentially like this shop owner and this guy like talking about this mirror, and I don't want to go too into detail because, you know, obviously it's a very short story. You don't want to get spoiled for too much. It's about a mirror and something about it. And yeah, it's pretty good. It's not great. Like I wouldn't put it in my top 10 obviously, but it's pretty good and I enjoyed it for what it was. So for that reason, I'm going to have to go with Reaper's Image for number 12. And for number 11 on my list, this is probably where people are going to be like, why? And I have Here There Be Tigers, which admittedly was very funny when we were doing the read-along for Skeleton Crew, and the first 2 weeks were dedicated to The Mist, and then right after that we get Here There Be Tigers, which is like a little like 6-page story that's a little incoherent and doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I kind of like it. I think it has its charm. It's essentially about this kid who like goes to the bathroom and there's a tiger in the bathroom. It's pretty silly, but I kind of like it. A lot of people said it's like bottom 5, bottom 3. But for me, I think it has its charm. And yeah, I really wanted to put it in my top 10, but I was like, it probably doesn't deserve to be there. So Here There Be Tigers is number 11. And now we're getting to the top 10 for Skeleton Crew. And number 10 for me would have to go with Grandma, which, like the title suggests, it's about a scary-ass grandma. This one was especially good to listen to on audio. I can't remember the audio narrator's name for this story, but she did a very good job at portraying, the old lady, the grandma in the story. And I especially like this one because it's King writing from the perspective of a very young protagonist, a very young boy. And it's very good, very creepy. I can definitely see why people enjoyed this one in the collection. And I definitely did too. I don't want to give too much away, but scary ass grandma. That's all you need to know. So yeah, Grandma comes in at number 10 on the list. And coming in at number 9 on the list, we have The Ballad of the Flexible Bullet. Now for me, this was the biggest surprise of this whole Skeleton Crew experience. I'm seeing a lot of people put this story, if not in their like top 10, like they're putting it in their top spot. Like it's their favorite story in the collection. And I did not see that coming from a mile away. Of course, when I get to my top 2, top 3, I would have probably thought it would have been any of those, but people really like The Ballad of the Flexible Bullet, which I'm not like completely shocked about because it is good. Like it's obviously in my top 10, but I'm just sitting here like, man, there's better ones. But again, it is number 9 on my list, so I do really like it. I especially like the audio because it's narrated by Dexter, aka Michael C. Hall, who's, Dexter is one of my favorite shows of all time. And this is actually not a short story. I would consider it a novella. It's about 50 pages, and it's actually very well paced. I will give Stephen King that. It's very well paced. I will say though, like towards the middle, you kind of get the reveal of like what is happening, and it's so silly. And it doesn't ruin it obviously because it's still in my top 10, but it's just like really that's what's happening. It's so silly, but it is very good, and yeah, I wish it would have been something else, but in true Stephen King fashion, it's very silly. But yeah, for all those reasons mentioned and probably other ones that I'm forgetting, I'm gonna have to go with The Ballad of the Flexible Bullet for number 9 on the list. And for number 8 on the list, we have Nona, which was one of the biggest surprises for me because going into my reread for Skeleton Crew, I was, looking at the table of contents. I'm like, okay, I remember these ones and I don't remember these ones. Nona was one of the ones that I just had no recollection of. I could not remember a single thing about it, and I was pleasantly surprised by how much I really enjoyed it. And again, I don't want to give too much away, but it's really good. Essentially what you get with this story is a guy who's in prison and you're figuring out why he's in prison. And I don't want to give too much away. It's really good. Yes, and I do know that a lot of people also really enjoyed it. So yeah, don't really have too much to say about it other than go read it and also just go read Skeleton Crew. Number 8 on the list is Nona. Number 7 on the list is Word Processor of the Gods. Now this one is really, really good. I love it, except for the ending, which sometimes Stephen King can muck up an ending. But essentially what you get with this story, Word Processor of the Gods, is this guy who's very depressed. He's kind of having a rough life. He, kind of regrets things that's happened in his life. And he notices this word processor that someone has made. And he notices that, if he types something in it, it becomes true. And so he starts kind of messing with it and things happen. And that's all I'll say. It's really good, and I love the concept. But the ending is too happy in my mind. I wish it would have went in a darker direction. Some people disagree with that, but I think it should have ended horribly. And that would have made it better. But I really like this one. It's definitely one of the better ones in the collection. So Word Processor of the Gods comes in at number 7 on the list. And now we're coming to my top 6, which I'm not saying top 5 because these 6 stories I wouldn't change a thing about. These are like the holy grail of this collection for me. I know some people are probably going to disagree with me about number 6, but that's okay. I feel like my top 5 is pretty solid. Most people would agree on them, but we'll see. And so for number 6, I'm going to have to go with Beach World, which this was also another one that I really didn't remember going into this. Like I remembered a lot of them, but Beach World was one of them where I'm like, what happens in that one again? And I was pleasantly surprised by the direction it went in. It's very science fiction-y, and it reminds me a lot of a Ray Bradbury short story, which makes sense because Stephen King, one of his inspirations, along with many other authors, was Ray Bradbury. And for me, it reads like a horror version of a Ray Bradbury short story. It's very good. Also, it's probably one of my favorites because, again, it's narrated by Michael C. Hall, aka Dexter. It's very good. I love it. I know a lot of people thought it was really dumb, but I love it. But yeah, again, just my opinion. Throwing my opinions out there. So for number 6, I'm going to have to go with Beach World. And now getting to my actual top 5. For number 5, I'm sure a lot of people would include it in their top 5. Some people would probably put it at their number 1 spot. But in my personal opinion, it comes in at number 5. And that would be The Mist, the novella that kicks off the collection. Obviously, I really enjoy it. It's very good. I love the characters, and I just love the premise of like this mist rolling into town and these people being locked in a supermarket and they don't have anywhere to go because they can't go outside because there's like these Lovecraftian creatures out in the mist that will, kill them. And just the scenarios that happen in the store while everything is going on. Very good character work and very good isolated, closed setting for Stephen King. Just everything works right for this novella. And that's one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite Stephen King novellas. So yeah, for all of those reasons, I'm going to put The Mist at number 5 on the list. Because the mist is on my list. It's so stupid. Coming in at number 4 on the list, I believe this is the most underrated short story in the entire collection of Skeleton Crew. So number 4 is Mrs. Todds Shortcut. I love this short story. It's so good. It's so, in my mind, it's perfectly paced. And just the reveals that happen and the directions it goes in, and the character of Mrs. Todd it gets very creepy by the end. And basically, you know, with a title like Mrs. Todd's Shortcut, it's basically this woman essentially finding shorter routes to get to one place or the other, to the point where the shortcut is becoming too short, and the guy she's with is like, this is not physically possible. It's not possible, until he figures out how she's doing it. And of course, I won't reveal how she's doing it, but it's very good. It's very creepy and atmospheric, and it's just so good. And I know a lot of people weren't thrilled by this story, but I definitely am. I love it. Firmly in my top 5 for Skeleton Crew. So yes, Mrs. Todds Shortcut, number 4 on the list. And number 3 on the list, we have The Raft. Oh man, I love this short story. And for anyone who's seen the movie Creepshow 2, this was like, I believe, the first or second segment in that movie. And I grew up watching that, and just the idea of like these college kids, like, you know, going out and like swimming in this lake, and they get on this wooden raft, and they're basically stuck there because there's a thing in the water, and it's trying to kill them. And it's basically this, I don't want to give away too much, but essentially they're stuck on this raft because of the thing in the water. And it's really good, and I really like the character work, and it's just quintessential King short storytelling in my mind. So yeah, for those reasons, number 3 is The Raft. So good. And now we're getting to the top 2 short stories in this collection, where basically a lot of people would put this at their number 1 and number 2 spots. This is really one of the reasons why Skeleton Crew is ranked so highly, is because of these 2 short stories. I love them, and it's very hard for me to pick which one is my favorite. I always kind of flip back and forth between the 2. But I will say, for right now, at this moment, number 2 on the list, I'm going to have to go with Survivor Type. This story kicks ass. It kicks a lot of ass. It really does. Essentially, what you get with this story is this doctor gets in a plane crash, and he's been trying to smuggle heroin and whatnot, and he's basically deserted on this island, and he has really no good food source, very little water, and very little supplies, and he starts getting very desperate, and the way that he has to survive is pretty gruesome. It's pretty awesome, and by the end of the story, it's so good. It's so good. It's also interesting because he writes it in a Postular Style, so you basically get the one and only character writing down all his thoughts while he's deserted on the island, and you can definitely see like his level of madness go bigger and bigger the further on you get into the story. It's so good, and it really pains me not to have it in my number 1 spot. But I'm going to have to go with number 1. The best short story in Skeleton Crew is The Jaunt. I love this story, and I'm so glad that so many people also love this story. I'm seeing people ranking it very high on the list, which makes me very happy. And yes, it's not definitely my favorite, because like Survivor Type is also very good, but I still remember the first time reading this story and just being so shocked by the ending, and just being so engaged in the story, because essentially it's a science fiction horror story. You get this family that's traveling to Mars, and the way that they're doing it is they're going through the process called the jaunt, which is essentially teleportation. So you get this dad who's telling them kind of the watered down story of how the jaunt was created, and then also at the same time you're getting the real story of how the jaunt was created, and just it's so good. And then also just the way that the jaunt process was discovered and the things that happened because of it are so good. And then, of course, the ending is horrific and terrifying and so good. I love the jaunt. And not only is it my favorite in Skeleton Crew, I would definitely, hands down, put it in like my top 5 Stephen King short stories of all time. Probably along with Survivor Type, but the more I talk about it, I'm probably going to go with The Jaunt as my favorite in Skeleton Crew. So yeah, that's my number 1 spot, and that is my ranking for all of the short stories in Skeleton Crew. And please let me know what you guys think of my ranking. Please let me know what your favorites and your least favorites are in Skeleton Crew. And if you want to, leave your ranking down in the comments below, or go check out my Discord where you can go check out everyone else's rankings. And yeah, it's been a really fun time reading Skeleton Crew with y'all, and I'm looking forward to next reading Nightmares and Dreamscapes. I don't think I'll like it quite as much as Skeleton Crew, but I am definitely looking forward to rereading it and hopefully liking it better upon my reread and seeing everyone else's reactions. I'm so curious because for a while this has been my least favorite, but I'm very interested to see what people think about this. All right, I believe that's all I have for you guys today. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and the Bookastromer Discord. And if you'd like to further support me financially, go check out my Patreon page and see what that's all about. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching and have a terrific day.